Governor, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Roisin Royal, and it is a great pleasure that on behalf of my Farmer Hill team that I introduce you to the members before you. Before I do, I should say that we are in different year groups. I'm in Year 11, and our speaker and vote of thanks are both in the lower 6th. Once, it might have been difficult for us to meet up or converse, but not in these days of social media. We tweeted and emailed aplenty, and today Facebooked each other to say when we would be arriving. The communication was instant, and on our phones, of course, which are never far from us. Social media is wonderful, isn't it? Or is it? Katrina Flesher, our speaker, will be looking at that into further detail, and Imogen Usherwood, our vote of thanks, will be listening carefully and leading us in the thanks afterwards. I know too that our questioner will no doubt have a searching question. But that's just it. In these days of social media, we can all raise a question at once or find someone's answer to it. Is this a good thing? How many of us in this room have more than one type of social media connection? Would you please raise your hand? As I thought, it is here, and for all ages. Does it bring us together? Is it socially binding? Or does it make us vulnerable? These questions we probably could have Googled and would have reached the second page of Google by now trying to find the answer. But instead, here is Katrina putting forward the idea. There is nothing social about social media. Katrina, would you please take the floor for your speech?
I think it's pretty ironic that my immediate instinct upon writing this speech was to Google define social media. Because even Google, which was once merely an innocent search engine, today has been overtaken with this hype of instant messaging and profiles. In case you're interested, which I do hope you are, otherwise this will be a very boring 6 minutes, Google deems social media to be websites which enable users to engage in social networking. And I think it's very telling that the definition of, indeed, the term itself, social media, contains the word social. It was designed to be about relating to people, communication and conversation. A good starting point, I thought, would be to take a look back and see really how society has changed since the advent of social media. And something which really struck me was the infamous statement attributed to Thatcher in the 80s. There is no such thing as society. In the decades since, it is fair to say social media has done its best to obliterate such an idea. I mean, more than ever, we're one international block of people, because wherever you go, be it Hong Kong or Argentina, you're still going to be lucky enough to hear the word Brexit on a daily basis. Theoretically, Thatcher's doomed declaration that a unified society is nothing more than a fantasy should have been entirely disproven by social media. However, the reality is very different from the theory. Really, social media's forte lies in its ability to amplify everything which drives us apart. Fundamentally, despite its role in advertising and even political campaigning today, social media was made for entertainment, and that's what it seeks out. Your online audience is one who, frankly, can't be bothered to read more than 140 characters, meaning short, snappy, sensational statements are what social media exists to feed. And the amount of reasonable discussion which this allows for is about the same as the amount of intelligence found in your average Donald Trump tweet. What then makes matters worse is the absolute lack of regulation online. You can be as vulgar as you like, and no one's going to come after you. I mean, Donald Trump knows it as well as anyone else. Online, there is no such thing as an ASVO. You can be as vulgar as you like, and the worst thing that's going to happen to you is your account gets deleted. And what do you do then? You make another. It is literally never ending, and it's certainly never controlled. I'm sure between triggering Article 50 by the end of the month in grammar schools, the last thing that Theresa May cares about right now is budgeting for an online police force to stop us being mean to each other. But I think what you can't ignore is the fact that social media has made acceptable what simply wasn't in the past. J.K. Rowling, for instance, received a whole host of abuse from Scottish nationalist cybernats on Twitter after she supported the Better Together campaign in 2014. And among other things, they called her a slimy, dog-faced Blairite. I'd pay you money if you could find me a single one of them that would have had the nerve to call her that to her face, and yet found it acceptable to do so online. And while I'm by no means pining for the days when the fastest form of communication was carrier pigeon, we've certainly even lost a certain amount of consideration what we say, because, frankly, there was no such thing as cyberbullying over facts. The speed with which we can make comments online, whether that's calling a teenage girl fat or accusing the Obama administration of phone tapping, and the fact that we can do so without repercussions, is outright dangerous. And this snowball effect isn't just the invention of my mildly technophobic brain, although by now I do think I have to concede I have one. There are scientific studies which show we're psychologically more likely to click on pages and people and links which we already know we agree with, as opposed to giving time to anything which might, God forbid, change our opinion. As a result, our own views get reinforced, and this echo bubble means that everything gets over the top very quickly. Suddenly, anyone holding an opposing view to our own has become the enemy, because conversations online are inherently blunt and adversarial. It'd be naive for me to totally dispel the positive impacts of social media too, though. I follow a Labour journalist on Twitter, Owen Jones, mainly because I fancy him, but that's beside the point. A few weeks ago, he sent out one single tweet suggesting that Britons take to the streets in protest of Donald Trump's Muslim ban, and that they did in their thousands, just 2 days later in 9 cities across the UK. Indeed, the only reason the petition protesting Trump's state visit has taken off in the manner it has is because of its circulation. That petition now boasts over 2 million signatures. As a result, we see the very same tools which can polarise us, uniting us in common cause at the same time. But all of that doesn't mean that I don't take issue with this idea that the use of social media is an inherently social action. Really, whether you're left-wing, right-wing, or only using it to post photographs of yourself, all social media benefits is our childish instincts towards the overdramatic. Bizarrely, today Thatcher's statement is more relevant than it ever has been in the past. There really is no such thing as society when we spend more time online shouting at each other than actually with each other. As a result, social media is bizarrely anything but. Thank you.
I'm sure you have a voting question from our questioner. So, Mr. Tanner, would you please post your question through me as chairman?
Thank you. If Theresa May could spare a little time in her crowded agenda, as you reminded us, and would agree to implement one thing that you selected to improve the way in which social media works, what would you choose and what would you ask her to do?
Thank you. So, Katrina, what would you like to change social media?
It's a very good question. I'm sure you can tell I've thought about it quite a lot. In economics, we talk about something called trickle-down effects, which essentially, if you change how people behave and what people do at the top, eventually that's going to sort of feed through to how we act as society at large. And if I could change one thing, it would be changing how politicians, celebrities use social media, because I think that really feeds through in how we use it ourselves. So, if Theresa May could do anything, in my ideal world, it would be some sort of regulation on how politicians particularly can use social media. They can't announce, in my world at least, policy via Twitter, because being able to confine complicated issues to 140 characters, I think is an incredibly dangerous tool. So, by regulating how politicians, MPs, prominent figures use social media, and by not allowing them to use it in careless and dangerous fashions and not use it as their primary form of communication, actually talking to people for once, I think that would really feed through into how we use it ourselves, because when you don't see the people you look up to using social media in this dangerous and carefree fashion, I think we would take a moment at least to consider how we use it ourselves as well and not do so in the same way. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Katrina. And now I shall ask Imogen to please take the floor for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Rishi. And thank you, Katrina, for what was a most enlightening and entertaining speech. You delivered a convincing argument that social media, despite its elusive title, is actually anything but, because it forces us to close in on ourselves and the rest of the world around us, whilst guising under the pretense of being social as we do so. I particularly enjoyed the references to Margaret Thatcher's famous quotation that there is no such thing as society, and how, even though it was said in a very different context, in a time before social media even existed, it is still very relevant to our lives today, if not more so. Now, as somebody who quit Instagram 3 years ago and has never looked back, I for one feel somewhat reassured about my lack of interaction on social media, even if I am still guilty of spending what is meant to be productive time watching cat videos on YouTube, but I'm sure many of you here could say the same, even if you wouldn't necessarily admit to it. Something that particularly resonated with me in Katrina's speech was the idea that people can take on a different persona when they use social media. I'm sure many of you here this afternoon have fallen victim to so-called internet trolls, or other such people who take advantage of their online anonymity. Katrina, you really brought this from your reference to J.K. Rowling being abused by Scottish nationalists on Twitter. It's clear you did your research, even if quite a lot of it does appear to have been on social media itself. Overall, I'm sure you will all agree with me that Katrina delivered a compelling argument, one which will go on to provoke an intriguing discussion for years to come as social media grows and develops with us. Her response to the question that maybe we need to learn to regulate the way that public figures use social media in order to regulate our own use of it really enabled her to expand upon the points that she made in her argument. And so it is with great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, that I invite you to join me in thanking Katrina in the usual way.
District Governor, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for me to close proceedings for my Farnborough Hill team. Let me remind us of what we have heard. First, we had a terrific speech on social media. I have to say, it made me realise how the last few years have changed things. There was a time that I was little, that my social network was really nothing more than my mother saying, "Go outside." You have identified the perils brilliantly, and our vote of thanks summed that up excellently, and your response to the question. Thank you, Imogen, for leading us in the vote of thanks so well, and to you, Katrina, for giving such a memorable speech, which was so relevant to us all. It leaves me now to thank you, District Governor, ladies and gentlemen, for being such a social and live audience. This completes the entry for Farnborough Hill. Good afternoon.